Hi everybody, my name's Andrew and today I'm driving a Ford Mustang Mach-E. And you join me right now at an Electrify America charging station in the parking lot of a Walmart. And that's really it. That's all I'm doing right now. I'm sitting here. I just had some chicken nuggets. And that's how today's going. I was actually supposed to be taking this thing on a little bit of a road trip up to Washington, D.C. for the weekend. However, that hasn't gone entirely to plan. I got a little bit into it and realized that I forgot two major pieces of filming equipment, and I just decided I felt like going back home. So, that's what I'm doing. I'm still going to be living with this car for the weekend, and I've already put 200 miles on it, so I can give you some thoughts already. But as of right now, I'm going to finish charging and go somewhere quieter than the Walmart parking lot so I can show you around this thing. So yes, this video was supposed to be two things. Number one, it was supposed to be my first experience road tripping an EV, specifically the Mach-E. Because for some reason, December, January, around this time is when I always tend to do road trips. 2020 in January, I went to Orlando. Last year, I went to Ohio 3 separate times in the span of a month and a half. That's a whole separate story. But either way, despite all these road trips, I've still never done one with an electric car. And it was also supposed to be going to the DC Auto Show and checking out all the new stuff there, and just generally having a fun weekend. Obviously, neither of those things are now happening, but I'm still going to give you a walk around of this car, and since I have still put some decent miles on it already, I'll still tell you what it's like to live with and charge. Starting with the exterior, we of course have to talk about the fact that Ford decided to use the Mustang nameplate on this four-door electric crossover. Now, they have tried to sort of make it look like a Mustang, even though overall it looks absolutely nothing like a traditional Mustang. They've given it some styling cues, like the fastback roof shape, even though that's not actually. They've just done that with a little bit of visual trickery. And the taillights are vaguely Mustang-esque, and of course they are sequential. But overall, I mean, it's not a bad-looking vehicle. It's just not a Mustang. And that's why throughout this video, you'll probably just hear me refer to this as the Mach-E and not the Mustang Mach-E. Another thing they've tried to do to make this look like a coupe, in addition to the visual trickery with the roof line, is get rid of the door handles. How you get in is actually this little button right here. You can see it. Once it unlocks, it pops electronically, and then you can pull it out with this little lip right here. The back doors, on the other hand, don't have a little thing for you to grab, so I guess you're just supposed to grab the paintwork, which doesn't seem like that'll hold up long term. Either way, it's a neat idea, but much like Tesla, I hate these door handles. Of course, I do also realize that they did the door handles that way for efficiency, for aerodynamics. But quickly, before we move inside the car, I wanted to just point something else out real quick, and that is the fact that I just realized there's no Ford badges on this car at all. Front and back and the steering wheel all have a Mustang logo, as do the kick plates. They don't want you to know it's a Ford either, but they certainly want you to know it's a Mustang. So take from that what you will. This particular one is affixed to a power liftgate, which the latch for is very low down, weirdly. Inside you'll find roughly 30 cubic feet of cargo space, which is virtually identical to the Model Y and ID4 and Ioniq 5 and the rest of them. But something that may be worth considering, why isn't that closing? I don't know. Something that may be worth considering, though, is the fact that all of them are a little bit smaller in terms of cargo space than the traditional gas-powered crossovers that you would expect in this size class, like RAV4, CR-V, etc. Hopping inside the Mach-E, honestly, the interior is the best part about this car. Obviously, it's miles ahead of a Tesla in here, but then again, so is a hospital waiting room. I don't say this about Ford very often, but they have done really, really well with the interior of this thing. It's very visually attractive. Everything feels like it's pretty well put together, and it's just a really nice place to be. The seats are a little odd because they're initially very comfortable. They're squishy, and you know, they feel pretty nice, but they don't have any tilt adjustment. Somehow they've managed to make that comfortable around town, but I will say on the highway, after an hour or two, they do start to be a bit lacking in the leg area. If I had to pick a favorite thing about this interior, to be honest, it's actually the dashboard. Obviously the screen is very much a focal point, but we'll get to that in a minute. The material choices are excellent again, and visually it's very attractive, so very much like that. This screen in front of the driver that acts as a gauge cluster, while it's not customizable in any way, it is very simple, it's easy to understand, and for that, it's perfectly fine. This screen, on the other hand, though, there's a lot going on here. Obviously, you have Apple CarPlay, which I would hope you would have Apple CarPlay. The wireless function of it is a little bit hit or miss. And also, for some reason, you have 2 different sizes that you can choose from. I think it's neat how they've integrated the volume dial into the screen, and I like that the volume is a physical control. But why aren't the climate controls physical then too? The thing that bugs me most about them, honestly, is this slider that pops up every single frigging time. And you have to hit that to make it go away. It doesn't go away on its own. So that's just an unnecessary button press every time while you're trying to drive. Also, God forbid you want to change a setting while you drive, because there's about 6 million menus, and even after 200 miles, I still haven't figured out where exactly everything is. It's not laid out very well. Overall, you know, the screen is great. Obviously, screens are the way we're going in cars nowadays, and this one isn't really overkill in the way that some EVs are, like the EQS or the Taycan, but the interface still could use a little bit of work. Hopping in the backseat of the Mach-E, once you get past the stupid door button popper things, it's actually really nice back here. This is where the fake fastback roof shape actually is an advantage, because it doesn't slope the way you think it does. So you've got a really good amount of headroom still. Obviously the all-glass roof does contribute to that as well. But just like the front seat, materials are nice. The seat's pretty comfortable. As with most EVs, there's no transmission tunnel, so you got plenty of space to move your feet and legs around. And overall, it's a pretty nice place to be. So, as you can see, it is now a different day, and it's raining today, which is lovely. But today we're going to talk about 2 things. One, how is this like to drive, and how is it to charge? Because those are actually both fairly interesting topics with this thing. Firstly, obviously, it's not going to drive like a traditional Mustang either. Obviously, there's no V8 exhaust note and no shifting through gears, but it actually drives really well, I think. It's a completely different experience, obviously, but I don't think it's bad. I saw a lot of people online when this thing first came out that said it was too bouncy, and that was mainly on forums, and you always have to ask, well, what do you drive? And it's always like a performance pack Mustang GT or a Shelby or something like that. Well, of course it's going to be bouncy compared to those. I actually don't find it bouncy at all. Yes, it is softer than what I am used to. Again, my S4. But it's not bad. It rides pretty well. It handles pretty well over bumps. It doesn't get thrown around too bad. And it's comfortable on the highway. I will say one thing it does need, though, drastically, is wider tires, both from a performance standpoint and from a visual standpoint. I think wider tires would make a massive difference. Also, I saw a lot of people that have driven this complain about the feel of the brakes. And on one hand, you know, there is a little bit of a learning curve with an EV, you know, with regenerative braking and blended braking, but I think they're actually right about that. The braking calibration in this car is a little bit weird, because when you come to a stop, you have blended braking as soon as you let off the pedal, a combination of regen and the friction brakes. But then once you get basically stopped, you know, 1 or 2 miles an hour, the friction brakes let go, and it just relies on the regen to roll you to a stop. So it's almost like you have a double stopping effect, where it'll feel like it comes to a stop and then it'll roll a couple feet forward and then actually stop. It's really weird. Also, the pedal itself, initially at the top, is very, very touchy. To the point where when I first got in this car, I found it hard to actually drive it smoothly. Now that I've put 300 miles on it, I'm more used to it, but it's a little bit weird at first. As is the one-pedal driving mode. If you've never been in an EV before, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but basically there's a mode that adds extra regen and basically means you can just drive with one pedal. You don't actually have to touch the brake pedal at all, because as soon as you let off the gas, it'll start coming to a stop, or let off the accelerator, I should say. And to be honest, having not a ton of EV driving experience like me, it may take some getting used to as well. After 300 miles now, I think I'm just barely getting used to one-pedal driving. It's really neat, don't get me wrong, but there is a learning curve there, and it is something to be aware of. You can also turn it off, and it will coast more like a normal car when you let off the gas. It won't be as strong regen. This Mach-E is also incredibly well equipped. There are a few oddities. For one thing, the seats, even though they're perforated, they're not actually cooled or ventilated in any way. But the heated seats do work really well, almost to the point of being too strong. The heated steering wheel is also a nice touch, something I miss in my car quite significantly. You have the full glass roof, power liftgate, and of course you have all the safety features that you would expect on a modern car. You've got blind spot monitoring, forward collision warning, and this one has Blue Cruise as well. If you're not familiar with Blue Cruise, it's basically a not fully autonomous, but it is a hands-free highway driving assistant. Of course, you do have basic lane centering for roads where Blue Cruise is not enabled, which does work really well as well. But Blue Cruise, I must say, is really cool. I haven't driven any GM product with Super Cruise, so I can't really compare it, but this is just as good as Tesla's autopilot. Honestly, in some ways, it's better. It doesn't do lane changes. I don't know if Super Cruise does. Actually, yes, some cars with Super Cruise do lane changes and some don't. So that is an advantage there. But either way, it's a really cool thing to have on a highway trip. So let's talk charging. You joined me once again at an Electrify America station to end this video, and you may be wondering, why am I using EA? Well, quite simply, they're the cheapest. Their Pass Plus membership for $4 a month buys your charging rate down significantly and pays for itself after one charge, so it's kind of a no-brainer. Also, this particular station right now is complimentary. I'm not getting massively great speeds out of this free session, but hey, at least it's free. Obviously, the way that most people are going to charge their electric car is in their garage overnight, like you would charge your phone. And my experience with that has actually been decent. Of course, it comes with an EVSE. I don't have a 240 outlet in my garage. I just have a 110. So I just plugged it into a regular wall outlet, and it doesn't charge very fast, but it charges, 20 to 30% overnight, which for the time that I've had this car has worked just fine. Now, I realize that a 240 outlet is kind of a necessity for a lot of people if you're actually going to be driving this car a lot every single day, and you don't want to rely on DC stations like this all the time. But for my situation, the wall outlet worked just fine for the weekend. And as far as my DC fast charging experience, well, the first thing you need to know is the charging curve of this Mach-E sucks. I don't know if they've changed it all since it first came out. I think they've changed it a little bit based on the videos that I watched when the car first came out, but it still sucks, honestly. You get, peak speeds of over 150 kilowatts, slightly, for a very short time when you first plug in. But honestly, the most common speed that I've seen is about 105 or 110. It likes to sit there for a while, and then once you get to 50%, I should say, it drops to 70 or 80 kilowatts. Right now, I'm at 70%, and we're doing not even 50 kilowatts, which is great. And once I hit 80%, it's going to absolutely drop off a cliff. I already know it, which is why it sucks that I have to sit here and top charge this thing to return it. But hey, what can you do? So from that standpoint, the Mach-E is actually not a very good road tripper. It does have decent range. This particular car is the standard range rear-wheel drive, but it is the premium trim. It's kind of an odd spec. But basically, the EPA range of this particular car is somewhere around 250 miles. The actual real-world range that I've seen out of it is closer to 220, 230. But honestly, that's not bad. And at 70 miles an hour, you know, it's still enough to make it in a decent time on a road trip. You just have to plan more than you would otherwise. And honestly, that's probably my least favorite part about road tripping with an electric car, is the fact that, A, it just adds a lot of extra time. If I had done this trip to Washington, D.C. and back, it would have added at least an hour either way, or both ways, I should say, at least an hour both ways, just for charging. Now, you can plan your stops to, you know, eat or go to the bathroom or do whatever while you're charging, so you don't have to stop additional times. But it's just the fact that, A, it adds so much time, and also B, you have to constantly do math while you're driving because the range estimate on here, if you've just been driving around in the city, your range estimate is not going to be accurate once you get on the highway for that road trip. And that's a problem that all EVs face, not just the Mach-E, because contrary to gas-powered vehicles, electric cars are actually more efficient at lower speeds or around town rather than just cruising. So, for instance, yesterday I got on the highway and I was 100% fully charged. And I thought I was going to have enough range to make it to Richmond, Virginia, from Raleigh, which is about, actually I don't know how many miles it is, but either way, the car initially said that I would get there and have 25% battery left, which is plenty. That's more than enough buffer. But by the time I started driving and at speed, that range estimate just kept dropping. It got to the point where it was looking like I was going to get there with 10% left. And then I decided to just stop in Henderson and put another 10 or 15% in it, just in case. I might have made it, but, you know, the fact that you constantly have to sit there and try to do math of how far you have left and not know exactly is just not my favorite thing in the world for a road trip. And that brings me on nicely to route planning. Now, obviously, I prefer to use CarPlay because I can use Waze, but in order to do route planning, you have to use the Mach-E's built-in navigation. And the route planning on this thing is good, but it's not great. I couldn't find a way to select a preference for chargers because, again, I wanted to just use EA. So it was going to put me at like a charge point and then an EV go, and then there wasn't really a way for me to change that. Also, again, the fact that the range estimate or your percentage buffer basically may fluctuate, that factors into it too, and it doesn't always plan very well for that. So to sum things up, Mach-E, even though it's not a Mustang, it's still a great car, drives pretty nice. It's just not a great road tripper. Now, some things you can't avoid car to car, like obviously, you know, my experience in the last 3 days with charger availability and reliability has actually been pretty decent, but it's not always going to be, and you can't change that with a different car. But what you can do is pick an EV for a road trip that A, has a better charging curve or higher peak speeds, and just simply has a bigger battery. So, like I said, not a bad car. I've enjoyed driving it for 3 days. I've put over 300 miles on it now, and great experience. Just not a great road tripper. And with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video or found it informative in some way. If you did, give it a thumbs up, or consider subscribing for plenty more content to come.